career of this episode's featured Fearmaker got off with a real bang. He'd been a fan of horror, science fiction, fantasy, and suspense films since his boyhood. Influenced by the Fearmakers of the generation before, he wanted to follow in their footsteps and continue the tradition of scaring the wits out of moviegoers by making the transition from fan to master Fearmaker himself. He decided the best way to go about this was to make a low-budget shocker of his own. The result was one of the most financially successful and influential films made outside the Hollywood studio system. The film was Halloween. And the name of this fan-turned-successful Fearmaker, John Carpenter.
The whole idea of fear and horror is to bond with the humans and the innocent. Because these movies are about the attack of irrational dark forces upon us all, you see. It's the unknown in the dark coming to get you. It's the you want the audience to be with. What's going to happen to me when I go home in the dark?
A film school graduate, Carpenter grew up on movies and feasted especially on the monster and science fiction films of the 1950s.
And they were really tremendously influential on my career. My dad gave me his 8mm movie camera. I made movies. I published an amateur magazine about these things, and I was just in love with horror films and science fiction. My mother took me to see It Came from Outer Space in 3D, and I put on these glasses. I didn't, what's this for? The opening of the movie, this meteor comes out of the sky and right out of the screen into my face and blows up right in front of me, and I went completely nuts. And I was frightened at first. I just didn't know what the experience was about, and I thought maybe I was in some kind of personal danger or something. Then suddenly I realized, boy, is that hot. I got to do that. I have to do that to an audience.
The son of a music teacher, John Carpenter originally thought of pursuing a career in music, but he changed direction due to his stronger love of movies, although he has kept his hand in by composing the music scores for several of his films.
Along the way in film school, I started doing my own music to the movies that I was making, and I thought, this is the way I can keep music in my life. This is the way I can actually be creative musically and have a kind of a second-handed musical career. So it was first out of love, and second, I'm fast and cheap.
Carpenter's feature film debut was a unique science fiction satire called Dark Star. It was a project he began in college with fellow classmate Dan O'Bannon, who would later write the script for Alien and other notable big-screen shockers.
That was a labor of love over 4 years. Myself and Dan O'Bannon were basically put it together. We wrote it and just got it done. You know, he acted in it. I was one of the voices. I did the music, I did the directing, he did the production design. We got our college friends to help us.
Dark Star was later expanded for theatrical release with the help of producer Jack H. Harris. 15 years earlier, Harris had brought moviegoers the screen's definitive tale of killer goo from outer space, The Blob.
Jack Harris was the only distributor in town who would buy this movie after we tried everybody else. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with it. He made us change certain things in it and really put us through the ringer. I mean, in a way, he was Dan and my teacher for what it's going to be like in the movie business. And he turned around and sold it to a young company called Bryanston Pictures. And they got all their money from releasing Deep Throat. And they were trying to go legit, so they released Dark Star. But Harris made money, and we didn't. We didn't make a cent.
Carpenter followed Dark Star with his first outright fear film, the independently financed Assault on Precinct 13. Combining elements from such disparate sources as Howard Hawks' John Wayne Western Rio Bravo and George Romero's zombie chiller Night of the Living Dead, Assault on Precinct 13 remains one of Carpenter's most powerful thrillers.
It was shown at the British Film Institute. And lo and behold, They went nuts for it, absolutely crazy for it. They got these reviews, and it was like, what? What is this? So my reputation actually began in London and with all the European critics, and came back to the United States. So by the time I was back over here, people were coming up and saying, you know, I heard about this movie that you made. It had been released in Los Angeles, mind you, a year earlier, but nobody knew that.
A taut tale of urban violence out of control, it even anticipated such future events as the LA riots and burning of Los Angeles in 1992.
Generally, what you feel in a Carpenter film is the isolation that he brings to any film, whether it's Assault on Precinct 13, whether it's the isolation of the precinct. I mean, this is a precinct in the middle of a city, and yet you feel this might as well be Fort Apache in the Nevada desert.
It's a goddamn siege. You're gonna stay here and hold until somebody comes, okay? We're in the middle of a city, inside a police station.
What does that mean?
They're not afraid to die, any of them. They want to rip us apart, no matter what it costs. It means to the death.
Precinct 13, cut off, isolated in the middle of a city, as a human wave of street killers turns the night into a nightmare.
We got a war going on down here. We can't find the damn thing.
Assault on Precinct 13.
The big screen film that catapulted Carpenter to fame among fear film fans hit theaters the same year.
And the experience with Halloween was very strange because the movie was platformed. It was released all the way across the country with very few prints. All the reviews, every single one of them, called it a turkey, said it wasn't scary, said, what is this garbage? So Deborah Hill and I went, oh, well, okay, on to the next one. Then there was a review in the Village Voice that compared it favorably to Psycho. And there started to be all this heat going on out there. People were going to see it around Halloween, and the grosses were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you go to a screening and you hear these people screaming their heads off. And I think partially because most exploitation horror movies weren't scary anymore. They'd fallen down into a kind of routine. And what I tried to do with Halloween was break that routine. You expect something to happen. You're in a horror movie. You're in a scary film. You know something's going to happen eventually. The question is when. You're waiting for it. That's why you put down your money. You've got your popcorn, got your arm around your date. Okay, it doesn't happen now. It doesn't happen now. When's it going to happen? I know it's going to happen. You get more and more tense. It was a roller coaster, so to speak, at the time. And it was a roller coaster without much blood. It didn't have any on-screen blood. It was all off-screen stuff. I mean, everybody knows what a knife can do. You don't have to show that. And it was the setup. The girls, the babysitters, the kids were vulnerable, extremely vulnerable. The audiences could identify with them. They could say, oh, these poor young girls and this terrible, evil thing creeping around in the bushes. It was kind of a classic confrontation. And it was misdirection and mistime, you know, and kidding the audience and faking them out and making them believe something was going to happen and when it wasn't. And it just kind of clicked in.
Halloween night. A small American town. 15 years ago. Michael? Halloween.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Halloween.
But even the detractors of such films found Halloween to be a skillfully made thrill show, head and shoulders above its follow-ups.
John Carpenter made a movie that managed to levitate the audience more often than any other film ever made. I mean, I remember seeing that, and I felt like it was on a roller coaster. And you know, I think you spent half the time in your seat and half the time about 6 inches above it.
Christopher Lee we tried to get for the Donald Pleasance role. Peter Cushing we tried to get. Weren't interested. Didn't want to do it. And then Donald Pleasance said yes, and he showed up, and I was extremely terrified of Donald. He was one of my favorite actors. He was The Great Escape. Oh my God! So I go to have lunch with him, and there's Donald Pleasance. Wow. He says, you know, the only reason I'm doing this is my daughter saw Assault on Precinct 13 in London and said you're pretty good, but I don't understand this movie at all. What's my character doing? Well, I don't know. What do you want him to do? I mean, I was absolutely terrified. Turns out, Donald and I became very close friends.
The film's trendy blood and gore may have been modern, but at its core, Halloween was a throwback to Grimm's fairy tales for adults. It had Fear Film Classic written all over it. Halloween was so successful that it spawned a bloody tidal wave of similar mad slasher pictures in the years to come. Carpenter decided not to repeat himself and directed none of the sequels or imitations spawned by Halloween.
When I started working on Halloween 2 and writing the screenplay, I realized, well, we really don't have a story here. I mean, we've done the story. Oh, no, I'm trapped in this. What am I going to do? So we escalated the violence a little bit.
He moved on to a tale of ghostly vengeance called The Fog. The film takes place in a coastal community set upon by a ghost ship whose crew was murdered 100 years ago for the gold on board. Now they have returned to seek vengeance on the descendants of those who perpetrated the deed. Carpenter emerged from The Fog with the violent comic book adventure Escape from New York, about a futuristic Manhattan turned into a maximum security prison.
I miss the old days. The old days, when you made B films or exploitation movies, okay, there was a difference between the Hollywood A film and the B film. And one of the things you could do in a low-budget movie was you could do some subversive things. You could actually get some things in there that weren't the mainstream, that wasn't Muzak movies, okay? You could actually give it a little juice, whatever you wanted to go for. And my favorite films have always included a little bit of, there's something funny about this. There's something twisting you the wrong way. It's not going to see Mary Poppins, all right? It's not going to see Julia Roberts or whatever you want to say. It's subversive. That's their power. So I always try to subvert a little bit in these movies. And it's like in Escape from New York. I mean, what you basically have is a straight action film, except there's a police state in the United States. And nobody's good. The police state's bad, and they throw all these prisoners in there. It's a kind of a strange world. Now, a lot of audiences didn't particularly pay any attention, but some did.
In the first of many big-screen collaborations with Carpenter, Kurt Russell starred in the film as a Clint Eastwood-like anti-hero named Snake Plissken, who takes on roving gangs of convicts inside the massive penal colony. Following his successful escape from New York, John Carpenter got the opportunity to make his first big-budget film for a major studio, the legendary home of all the classic monster movies he'd grown up with, Universal Pictures. The film, considered by many to be his greatest work to date, was his remake of the 1951 Howard Hawks science fiction classic, The Thing.
The Thing from another world. This is the spot where it was first seen, and these are the first people who saw the thing. How did it get here? Where did it come from? What is it?
That thing's alive, sir. I saw it. I shot at it. I hit it. I know it. Nothing happened. It just kept coming at me, making a noise like a cat mewing. Captain, it was awful. If you could have seen those hands and those eyes. Captain, you've got to do something about it. You've got.
Is it human or inhuman? Earthly or unearthly? Baffling questions, astounding questions that not even the world's greatest scientific minds can answer.
Gentlemen, do you realize what we've found? A being from another world, as different from us as one pole from the other. If we can only communicate with it.
See?
What happened, Doctor? In the greenhouse, I was working. I couldn't see.
Yeah.
Then Then a blast of cold air, and I heard Olson scream.
Come here. Get in the corner. Now hold this in front of you. Stay by the light switch.
1.9. Needles hit the top.
In fact, Carpenter's The Thing is not an outright remake of the Hawks film at all. As its opening credits make clear, the film was John Carpenter's The Thing, not Howard Hawks' film recreated. It was also a much more faithful rendering of the John W. Campbell story, Who Goes There, upon which the Hawks film was loosely based.
That's one of my favorites, because I liked the original, and I liked his new take on what Hawks did, because it was sort of a whole different way to go at it.
The story concerns an ancient alien life form recovered from the Arctic ice in which it was trapped long ago. The Thing has the ability to voraciously assimilate other creatures, even humans, and take on their appearance and behavior.
That ending with the two of them sitting there and knowing that, well, one of them's probably a human being, it's probably Kurt Russell, and the other guy is probably an alien. But knowing that death is going to overtake them, there's no rescue for either one of them. But you're also left with that uneasy feeling that it doesn't make a difference. Kurt Russell, the hero, is dead. But that alien, he's just frozen. And somebody could maybe take that body back down to Washington and dissect it, and you're going to have the whole problem. And that's what Carpenter wants to leave us with. He wants to leave us with the fact that it might not all be over.
Bolstered by some of the most amazing special effects ever put on film, Carpenter's The Thing reveled in its wild array of eye-popping scenes of thingness. This led to charges by many critics that Carpenter had overindulged in freakish special effects and gross-out shocks at the expense of character in his version of The Thing. Perhaps as a reaction to those charges, he firmly slammed on the brakes with his next film, Christine. The film was based on a Stephen King novel about a nerdy high school loner who falls for a haunted 1958 Plymouth, with dire consequences for his enemies and for himself. Fans of Carpenter and of King's book were disappointed with the film, which concentrated less on effects and shocks than on character, and Christine was not a big box office success. Reverting to the comic book style of Escape from New York, Carpenter mingled the action, kung fu, and horror genres in a strange and extravagant tale called Big Trouble in Little China. Kurt Russell again played the lead role, this time borrowing traits for his character from John Wayne rather than Clint Eastwood. Like Christine, Big Trouble in Little China failed to make big waves at the box office. Carpenter returned to independent filmmaking and to horror, pure and simple, with his 1987 Prince of Darkness. Although the film was made independently, Carpenter still had the ear of the major studios, and Prince of Darkness was released by Universal Pictures. A tale of Satan's reemergence in the modern world with some misguided scientific help, Prince of Darkness mixed social commentary with scare tactics in a manner reminiscent of the films that had made Carpenter's name, Assault on Precinct 13 and Halloween. The same mixture highlighted Carpenter's next film, the offbeat science fiction adventure, They Live.
I think They Live is the best because it's delightfully subversive. You know, it's got a point to it that John sort of snuck by. I think it's kind of an important movie in its own quiet way.
They Live is John Carpenter's lost masterpiece, and I hope other people discover it in the future.
They Live is basically an alien invasion movie, except it's about the Republicans being these creatures from outer space. You try to subvert what's going on because you can, because it's a low-budget film, because that's what it's supposed to do.
On They Live, I had an opportunity to design some aspects of the effects, even though the basic effects planning was in place. There would be design specifics that still had to be worked out, and John allowed me to do those. I designed the specifics of the transporter room where the sort of yuppies or zapped off into space for holidays or reorientation, whichever way you want to look at it. And I designed the little probe device that hovers over with a spy camera in it and observes the, Roddy Piper and the various other actors. And I designed the specifics of the computer printout or the viewpoint of the flying saucer.
In the film, Earth has been taken over by right-wing aliens who dominate the human race by playing on our capacity for greed and social apathy. In this bizarre political allegory of the conservative 1980s, which has evoked comparison to Rod Serling's legendary TV series The Twilight Zone, and to director Don Siegel's classic tale of pod people and paranoia, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the aliens can only be identified as such from the rest of us and defeated when viewed through special sunglasses.
My star is a professional wrestler who became a big friend of mine. And I thought, what better thing to do in a movie about the 80s is to do a fight scene that is absolutely opposite of 80s fight scenes. So I sat down with Roddy Piper and I said, let's do an alley fight. Let's get these guys to just beat the hell out of each other. What is it really like? That's what it's really like. I mean, yeah, there's some wrestling moves, but these guys are just going at it. And Keith David was an actor and not particularly a fighter, and they rehearsed to the point where they were making contact. In other words, that's a fight where movie fights, you swing and the other guy, you miss him. They were hitting each other because they had the fight choreographed down so much. That's what gives it its power. There's a great fight scene in The Quiet Man. It isn't as great when you go back and look at it, okay? It's better in the memory, but it goes on and on and on. It's just kind of this long fight where they're swinging at each other. And I kind of wanted to do that. It was part of the theme of They Live.
John Carpenter harkened back to another of his favorite fear films of yesteryear, James Whale's The Invisible Man, with his own variation on the theme, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, based on a novel by H.F. Saint. The film presented huge challenges for Carpenter and his effects team in terms of making star Chevy Chase's escapades in invisibility absolutely convincing.
I've heard the criticism that the effects in Memoirs of an Invisible Man dominated the picture. I really didn't see that. I thought they derived from the story, from the plot, from the situation. I thought they were fine. John very rarely, or if ever, lets the effects dominate the story. I think John always keeps the effects subservient to the film. I mean, his focus is the story and the scenes and the characters and the events, and the effects are just there when they need to be. I don't think John's ever made the mistake of letting the effects dominate.
Fanciful, funny, and a technical knockout though it may have been, Memoirs of an Invisible Man was not the kind of film his fans wanted to see from the cinema's titan of Trick or Treat. They wanted Carpenter to return to his traditional landscape of chills and thrills, which he did with a vengeance. The Lovecraftian titled In the Mouth of Madness.
I wanted to make In the Mouth of Madness because I felt it was the closest I could come to doing a Lovecraft story. With humor, with a modern-day Lovecraft story, without the problems, because Lovecraft is almost always told with a narrator who's involved with the story, and things that you cannot put on screen, they have to exist in a story, in your mind. And In the Mouth of Madness actually it's about Lovecraftian, the Cthulhu mythos, okay? The creatures from beyond are waiting to take over again. And you actually get to see them chasing Sam Neill. And I thought, oh, what a great chance to do a horror movie based on Lovecraft. I have to do this movie. I have to try to do the flopping thing in the dark.
Now determined to stay the course in the cinema of fear and fright, John Carpenter turned again to remaking another classic fear film of his youth, the 1960 shocker about menacing otherworldly children, Village of the Damned.
Universal came to me in 1992 and said, we would love to do a remake of Village of the Damned. How do you feel about it? And it had been a personal favorite movie of mine, but also the novel, The Midwich Cuckoos, was one of my favorites. It was written by John Wyndham in the 50s. Basically an alien invasion story, but kind of told from a different point of view. And I said, yeah, if I can kind of make it my own, and they agreed, and so off we went.
Like The Thing, this new version of Village of the Damned would be no mere revisiting of the earlier film. His name above the title once again, this would be John Carpenter's Village of the Damned.
Carpenter, I think, is a master of shock. I think his stuff is, and kind of impact finding those places where you just get the audience to just scream and jump out of their seats.
There's not a lot of ambiguity in the movies these days. But you've got to realize that the country is going in a certain direction, and along with that comes the entertainment industry. So you just kind of got to hang on to your hat and survive, I guess.
John Carpenter once called his movie Halloween the film equivalent of a haunted house exhibit at an old county fair. The scares are carefully calculated, coming at you at just the right moments between lulls to ensure a thrilling ride. Without apology, he says, it's the kind of escapist entertainment that sums up what his movies are really all about. It's the kind of entertainment he enjoys most himself, he says, which is probably why he is one of our most adept fearmakers at pulling it off so well.